But we were going through a series, and again, I was going to point to the screen, but I don't have a PowerPoint today, so that's going to distract me not having it. But last week we looked at, and I encourage you to go online if you want and watch the whole thing, but last week we looked at just kind of human sexuality from Genesis to kind of just through the Bible. And so a quick recap, is this idea that biblical sexuality in the Old Testament, right, marriage for kids, and again, in a culture where women were property, men are about 30, wives are kind of teenagers, and with the command, especially for the people of Israel, to fill the earth. But as Augustine says, that this command to get married and have children and fill the earth, that ends with Jesus. And most Christians agree with that today. Not all, but most Christians agree with that. We're not Jewish. We don't live under Mosaic law. That's not for us anymore. In the New Testament, you have Jesus and Paul both endorsing being single for the kingdom. Not that marriage is wrong, but the best thing you can do is be single, focus on the kingdom. Even if you're married, it kind of distracts you. And we don't grow the family through procreation anymore, but we grow the family through evangelism, right? This is how the family of God now grows as the Gentiles are brought in. And so growth is through evangelism, not procreation. Again, marriage is good. Just don't let it take your focus from the kingdom work. Or as Paul says, men, if the time is short, he thinks it's short. And he says, men, if you're married, act as if you're not married. I'm going to encourage you not to do that. That's what I'm going to encourage you not to do. But this idea that marriage is only for kids, and then in the New Testament, that actually, due to the way that some people read Paul and one mistranslation, it led to about 1,500 years of sex itself is actually bad, and so the only good sex you can possibly have is for procreation. That is the only thing that is acceptable. So contraceptives, homosexuality, even masturbation, anything that would not lead to children was wrong. Only sex for kids, and even if you enjoyed it, some people thought that was sinful, so you had to try not to enjoy it. And one guy at the back was like, "Amen." No, just kidding, right? And so, right? Just kidding. That was a terrible joke. Just stick to the script. And so, but today we don't believe that, right? Today people get married and they family plan, and no one thinks, "Oh, you're a sinner." Actually, a few people do, but in general, most Christians don't think you're a sinner if you use contraceptives, if you take birth control, if you family plan, if you have sex for fun. No one's mad. And some Christians, because of their faith, they say, even though I'm married, I'm not going to have children. One, I don't want to add another mouth to the world, overconsumption, steward God's creation. Other people say, I'm not going to have biological kids. I'm going to adopt the kids that are in foster homes. That, due to their faith, I will not have kids. I will not procreate. I will take care of other people's kids who don't have parents. And we all go, that's amazing. That's wonderful. And their faith has led them to that. And so what we practice today is so different from even just a few hundred years ago, and certainly all of history, kind of Jewish history and Christianity. And so in light of this, right, and so light of those facts, but also in light of the fact that we live in the already and the not yet, right? The kingdom is here, but it's not complete. And Jesus says, in the new creation, he says there is no marriage, right? And people debate, he says there is no marriage, we will be like the angels. And some people debate, well, does that mean genderless, or do we still have gender? It's a debate no one knows, unless you happen to know angels. No? Okay, so it's still a debate. No one solved it here today, right? So he says, we will be like the angels, and so what does that mean? But he says, we will not be, there's no marriage. There's no marriage. So every conversation around marriage that we have today falls between what we used to think and to the future, which is coming, where there is no marriage, right? And so what does that mean then for marriage today? And so any conversation, because today we're going to look at kind of the LGBTQ community, and so, and where does marriage fit into that, and where does this fit in with what the Bible says? And so that's kind of just a bigger picture to kind of keep in all these things. Where we came from to where we're headed for the conversation that we're having, it fits into this space. The second thing as we're about to dive into this is that this is not a topic that is theoretical. This is we're talking about, as we talk about the LGBTQ community, and these are real people. It's not a topic that is out there. These are the people sitting next to you. These are people in your family. These are people creating the image of God. And so how we talk about this is really important. Because even after Christians fought to free slaves, we then said they're 3/5 human. And we kind of, the way we talked about women in the past, basically talked about them and said, you're equal, but not really. You can't vote. You can't do all these things. The way we talk about people impacts the way that we treat people. And so the way that society and the way that churches talk about the queer community, right, it's led to real, actual violence against real, actual people. Right, in KW, the numbers came out a month and a half ago. Right, of the top 3 hate crimes, LGBTQ is still the top. It's still the most hate crimes against them. Anti-Semitism is number 2, and anti-Muslim hate is number 3. right? Like, this is the reality of the world we still live in. And so how we talk about people, especially the LGBTQ community, has actual impact. And again, suicide rates are still higher for LGBTQ youth, right, than just your regular youth. It's still higher. And then if they're a part of the church, it's actually 3 times higher, which is a really sad stat that the place where you're supposed to find the love of Jesus and find people who will, walk with you and love you, actually increases the chance of suicide. And so, again, as we talk about this, we've got to keep that in mind. And then lastly, as we talk about this, we're going to look at 5 verses this morning. There are 31,102 verses in the Bible. We're going to look at 5 of them on this topic. There's 300 verses on the treatment of the poor. So if you want to put those next to each other, I think God is more concerned about how we treat the poor and what we do with our money than he is about this topic. That could be bad theology, but just throwing that out there. 5 out of 31,000. Doesn't mean it's not important, but it's not something that Jesus spent a lot of his time talking about. And as we're about to go through this, there's 3 ways to read the Bible when it comes to the LGBT community. The first is you read it in English, you read it straight, and it says what it says. And what's good about that view is that it takes Paul seriously, it takes the Bible seriously. It's kind of clear cut, right? You just read it and you go, here's what it says, here's what it means, right? So there's pros and cons. The con to it, of course, is that if you just read it and take it literally, you have to take all the Bible literally, which is impossible if you've ever tried. And it's hard to then just read it and go, well, what do we do in our modern context, and what do we do with actual real-life human experience of people that we know? When you just take something from there, something that is a reality, and you just try to mash them together. So there's pros and cons to that. The second way is that you read it and you say, Paul absolutely means it, but he also meant what he said about slavery and that women should sit at the back with their head covered, being quiet. But we don't believe that anymore. We don't believe it about slavery. We don't believe it about women. We don't believe what the Bible teaches about abortion, which is that unborn fetuses don't have value. And so we don't believe either of any of those 3 things. And so the second view is you read it, Paul meant it, it just doesn't fit into our culture anymore, like we do with other things. That's the second way. And so the pro of that is, it's compatible with other things we've kind of cultured away. The downside of that, of course, is that you don't wrestle with the actual context, right? You don't wrestle with what it actually says if you just say, well, we're going to culture it away, which we have done in some ways. But for a lot of what we've cultured away, we've at least wrestled through it, which is the third view we want to do this morning, is to kind of deep dive into some of this context. I didn't bring the book up. I said bring your book up, and I didn't. So there's a lot of books you can read. I'd encourage you, if you're really like, I should probably read about this, and you should. There's a really good book, which I'm forgetting because it's sitting on my desk right now. But it's the 4 views. I think it's called like Homosexuality in the Church or something. And there's 4 views, four authors. They each write an article. What I like about these 4 view books is there's an essay, and then the other 3 authors respond to that essay, and then the original author responds to their responses. And it's just really helpful. Because you read something, you go, that makes sense. Then these guys go, it doesn't make sense. You go, that makes sense. And then that guy responds, and you go, oh, that makes sense. And you're like, wow. Right? But it's an actual dialogue, right? And there's 2 who would be considered like kind of more on the like affirming side, and there's 2 on the more traditional side. And they're all friends. They all very respectful. It's a really helpful. If you're going to be like, I'm going to read one book, just read that. The other reason it's helpful, I actually read that book last, and they just kind of quote all the other books I read. And you're like, I should have just read this one. You did all the work for me. But I encourage you, if you're only going to read one book, I do encourage you to read that book. And so we want to kind of run into these things. And so we're going to start off with Leviticus 22. We're not going to read through all of these just because some of them are quite short. Leviticus 22 says, do not lie with a man as with a woman. That is detestable. Maybe your Bible says an abomination, right? But first things first, abomination, that sounds pretty bad. There's 117 laws about what is detestable or an abomination. 5 of them are sexual. 1 of them includes hitting your parents. 1 of them includes wearing the wrong clothes as a priest. Some of those things mean you should die. So if you read what's abomination, that's pretty bad. Almost everything in the Old Testament is an abomination. The shame that lies with this, right? Do not lie with a man as with a woman, that is detestable. The shame is in being treated like a woman. In the Old Testament, women are inferior, men are superior. That's just how it is. Like Deuteronomy 22, it says, a man who dresses like a woman is detestable. It's the same word. For a man, right? Or a woman who dresses like a man, it's detestable to God. So if you are a woman wearing pants today, that is an abomination, right? And you think it's kind of like, I laugh at that and go, that's a joke. No, there's still pastors today. Not many, but a few who still preach that women who wear pants are sinners. You are not. I'm going to go ahead and give you the grace to wear pants. Right? And so when someone says that, right? That one, the small one. That's the one. I'll hold it up at the end. My wife, so lovely. Okay. Although she is wearing pants. Yeah, that one. Yeah, Homosexuality, the Bible, and the Church. It's the 4 essays. It's a really helpful book. You should read. Don't read my copy. I keep losing books to people, but you should get your own copy. And then the second one in the Old Testament is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, but also Judges 19, which is the exact same story. Different cities, same story. Both of those stories, a guest comes into the city. All the men say, "Bring him out here. We're going to rape him." And then they go, no, take my daughter, take my concubine. In one of the stories, they don't. In one of the stories, they do, and they rape her and they kill her. And no one seems worried about the women. It's just don't dishonor the men, right? And according to Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, it has nothing to do with homosexuality. It has to do with the rape, the intent of sexual humiliation, which is still practiced today. There's still practice today. You can just Google it, not right now, right? It's called the Bush Brides of Africa. It's the same thing. When you rape a man in certain cultures, it renders them totally useless culture. Nobody will talk to them. No one will hire them. And that's why they do it. It's the same thing. Noah had the same thing happen to him with his son, that weird after he got drunk bit. And then David's men being chased by Saul, same thing happened. They shaved half their face, cut off their tunics at the waist, if you get my meaning. And so David says, because to feminize them, it's to humiliate them. And so it happened then, it still happens today. And according to the 3 prophets, right, inhospitality was the reason for this. In Jude, there's one verse. Jude's about 1,200 years after. I don't know why Jude says that, because nobody through the rest of the Bible says that anything to do with homosexuality. It's about the intent to humiliate. That's basically the Old Testament. It's shameful to be a woman, to be treated like a woman, and that continues on through the New Testament, as we're about to find out. So 1 Corinthians 6, I'll read this. This is Paul writing to the Corinthians. Again, the Corinthians, about the most wild bunch of new Gentile Christians you've ever met. And at one point in 1 Corinthians 6, he says, "Don't you realize that those who do wrong will not inherit the kingdom of God?" He says, "Don't fool yourselves. Those who indulge in sexual sin, worship idols, commit adultery, who are male prostitutes or practice homosexuality, or are thieves or greedy people or drunkards or abusive or cheat people, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God." And then 1 Timothy, which is really similar. Again, just the words we're going to look at. "For the law was not intended for people who do what is right. It's for people who are lawless, rebellious, who are ungodly, who are sinful, who consider nothing sacred, who defile what is holy, kill their father or mother, or commit other murders. The law is for people who are sexually immoral, who practice homosexuality, or slave traders, liars, promise breakers, who do anything else that contradicts the wholesome teaching that comes from the glorious good news entrusted to me by our blessed God." We put these together because there's 2 words that are used in here which kind of brings them together. The one word is malakoi. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I'm not Hebrew, so I'm okay. Right? The word is malakoi. And the literal meaning is soft. In both Matthew and Luke, the word is used. That's the only other time it's used. It just means it's talking about clothing. It's talking about fine clothing. It says it's soft. But in ancient kind of Greek literature, it's a slang word for pederastic practices, which is basically just a fancy word for sex with young boys. It's not exclusively used for that, but it appears mostly in that way. It also, the same word malakoi, the word soft, is for anything considered unmanly or morally weak. In one example, men who study too much, right? Nerds, right? Because again, to us we go, well, that's ridiculous, but in that culture, that was something that made you soft, right? It's not a typical word for what you would say homosexual. It leans toward this idea of being treated like a woman. You are soft, you are feminized, right? And being feminized, not a good thing, right? Philo, who's writing right around the time of Jesus and Paul, he's talking about the use of young boys for sexual pleasure. And he says it's wrong not because they're boys and not because of age of consent. They don't have those things, but because they're being treated like women, right? Like the idea of being treated like a woman is so shameful because as a man, and not just in Jewish culture, in Roman culture, in Greek culture, in so many cultures around the world, this idea of manliness, of especially your sexual prowess and virility, power, dominance, all of these things come together. So to have those taken away, right? To have those taken away leads you to be like a woman, which today we go, well, women are wonderful, right? But then again, it was not. Women were inferior, women were weak, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and morally too. Women were morally inferior to men. Clement of Alexandria in the 2nd century, right? He says, those who live in luxury, they dye their hair, like their gray hair, right? Anybody dye their gray hair? Hold on, right? And those who shave, right? And those who shave, because these are feminine things. He goes, and if you shave and dye your hair during the day, he goes, it'll lead to being like feminized at night. And he's saying same-sex encounters, right? If you do these things in the day, I can't imagine what you're doing at night. This thought of trading the honor of maleness, right, for the shame of being a female. And again, you can read all sorts. Just read the book. There's like it goes on and on and on and on, right? There's just this sense of being feminized. What makes you soft. Being anything like a woman. Soft is also a description for eunuchs. And here's what they do. And again, people would come, they would kidnap young boys, right? Then they would castrate them so that they wouldn't hit puberty. And they would kind of keep those, like I think like the English boy choir, I think that happened there. They just, no one listens to those? No, okay. Right? But this is what they would do. They would castrate them so they wouldn't grow up, they wouldn't hit puberty. They kind of kept this boyish thing. Like, this is weird stuff, right? But then they would sell them to the wealthy as sex toys, or they would sell them to pimps who would then prostitute them out. And so one of the descriptions for eunuchs, it says those who are softened, right, by the blade. These people who are softened who are castrated as boys so that they don't hit puberty. And then the hard part is these eunuchs, these boys, they were shamed for one, being castrated. It was shame to be castrated because you lost your virility. But they were also shamed for being sexually abused. Like they were being sexually abused. They were literally being sold. They were being pimped out. They were being bought by the rich for pedestry, like the sexual abuse of young boys. But then they were being shamed for it, like as if they had any choice in this, right? But that's just how it looked at it. It didn't matter that you were kidnapped. It didn't matter you were being, that someone with power was doing this to you. What mattered is that this was being done to you, and that was the shameful bit, right? Now, the same word, soft, is also used for men who were lazy, lacked courage in battle, lacked self-control with both women and with food, right? The sense of lack of self-restraint or discipline. So there's this idea of feminized, there's this idea of this sex with young boys, but also just lack of self-restraint in general. And so not a typical word for homosexual, but definitely related to pedestry, this abuse of eunuchs, and just kind of a general lack of restraint. And so when you read that word in your Bible and it just says Malachi, just says homosexual, it's way bigger than that, right? It's way, way bigger than that. And now there's one word that's used in both passages, Corinthians and Timothy, and they are arsenokotai. Right? Now this is a word that Paul made up, never used before. Paul made this up. He took two words, put them together. It means male bedders, basically. It's the word male and going to bed, male bedders. Which no Bible translated as homosexual until 1947. If you have a Bible before 1947, you'll never see the word homosexual in there. Once somebody started to, everybody did. But the hard part is, it's not in the Bible, this word, right? And so you have to go outside of the Bible and after the time of Paul because no one's ever heard the word before. So there are other uses in later non-biblical writings. The Sibylline oracles, it says, do not steal, do not arsenikatoin, do not betray information, do not murder, give to one who has labored his wage, do not oppress a poor man, take heed of your speech, keep a secret matter in your heart, take care of widows and orphans and those in need. Right? Nothing to do with sexual anything. It has to do with economic exploitation. In the book called The Acts of John, there's a whole bunch that comes before, but he says, so also the murderer, the poisoner, the sorcerer, the robber, the swindler, the arsenikatois, the thief, and all of this band, guided by your deeds, you shall come to the unquenchable fire. Again, both of these books, there's more, but these two are the main ones. They have sections about sexual ethics. This is not where this comes from. This is about this idea of one who exploits somebody else. This is who's being condemned, and they're using the same word. And so for theologians and people trying to figure it out, they go, well, what does Paul mean? He's never used the word before. It doesn't show up anywhere else. And when it does show up, it means, sometimes they use it in what seems a sexual sense. Sometimes they use it in an economic exploitation sense. And so it's one of those words where people go, honestly, we don't totally know what this means. There's some struggle. And so the word does not mean, in the general sense, homosexual. There's another word they could have used. But its range means those who do anally penetrate, male or female, a rapist, a murderer, or an extortionist, right? In all of these things. And so, again, pedestry is the main consensus of scholars. And again, scholars debate. They go back and forth. They don't agree with each other. But even Gordon Fee, fairly conservative commentator, he says, he goes, Greek literature, this word is hardly ever used to describe an actual homosexual act, right? And Martin Luther, in his translation, 1534, how does he translate the word? He says boy molesters, right? That's how he translated. That's his understanding. And the understanding mostly comes from where the three words fit together. And this is in 1 Timothy. It puts the three words together. And I don't know if you have it with you, but right where it says the sexually immoral, porne, which comes from prostitute, those who practice homosexuality, arsenikatoi, and slave traders, right? These are the three words in a row. And because they put them in a row, not all, but a bunch of commentators say this: the picture of this is not just, two men who love each other. This is the idea of the people who use male prostitutes or male prostitutes, those who slave trade, who kidnap the kids, castrate them, and then those who use those kids, right? And they put these three together, and they go, I think that's why they do it. This is how this all works, right? You kidnap them, you castrate them, you sell them to them, and then they prostitute them out. It's this whole picture of a thing. Agree or disagree. There's many books who agree and disagree with each other. But this picture of a male who beds males, right? Most likely, again, I'm not saying this is most likely the context of the masters, the rich, and the powerful, exploiting sex with slaves, young boys, and eunuchs. Because again, sex with your slaves, male or female, is always acceptable in Roman culture, even in Christian culture up until kind of in the 300s, where John Chrysostom, he actually has to give a sermon where he says, guys, sex with your slaves is still adultery. And they're like, oh, okay. So, because it was such just a normal part of the thing. And so, again, male who bed males, those who exploit the vulnerable for pleasure or profit. Again, you don't have to agree with that. Maybe he just means straight up homosexual. Maybe he does. But for most commentators that go, actually, we don't really know. It's a weird word. He made it up. Other people use it in such different ways. It's pretty tough to deal with this. So the one key verse, again, you can read this stuff. You can study this stuff. It's heady. It's big. It's, interesting. But Romans 1 is really the one that you have to go to, especially verse 18. This is kind of the one where, again, a lot of commentators will go, every other example is just talking about sexual abuse of young boys, of eunuchs, and of slaves. And so for most people, you go to Romans. Starting in verse 18, let's read this for you quick. It says, but God shows his anger from heaven against all the sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth. By their wickedness, they know the truth about God, because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, his divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. Again, Paul's writing to the Jews at this point, and he's about to talk about the Gentiles. And yes, they knew God, again, these are the Gentiles, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. And as a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. Instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worship idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. That's Paul critiquing Roman religions. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their heart desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie. They worshipped and served things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. This is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged with sex with each other. And then the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men, and as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves, right, the penalty they deserved, right? And since they thought it foolish, to acknowledge God, right, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. And then he goes on to say, here's all the list of the other terrible things: gossip, malicious, haters, backstabbers, prideful, boastful, disobedient to parents. There's a whole vice list. Paul does a lot of vice lists, right? So yeah, this is where most people will go to, right? If you ever have a decent conversation with someone, Timothy, Corinthians, Leviticus, pretty tough to work with. But Romans is where you go to. And so, again, males at the time, Jewish and Roman, you get married about 30. You want to wait till you're 30 to get married. Your wife's usually a teenager. So before you're married, again, use of prostitutes is morally fine. Young boys, it's fine. It's not shameful. Even after marriage in Rome, your wife was for having kids, so it was still morally acceptable to sleep with your slaves, but never another man's wife. That was unacceptable. And never another man who was also a free Roman citizen, right? That was unacceptable. But only if you were the one being dominated, right? In Roman culture, if you had any sort of same-sex activity, as long as you were the man doing the dominating, that was okay. If you were the one being dominated, that was never good. In fact, unless you're a foreigner, then they don't care. But if you're a Roman, not good. And in fact, it was illegal for a Roman man to allow himself to be dominated, used like a female for sex, whether at the temple or just in general. And again, that same picture that comes, the shame is always on the man, right? Whether by choice or by violence, right? Even, again, the eunuchs who were kidnapped, used, slaves who were abused by their owners, the shame was always on them, even though they had no choice. And why? Again, because honor, virility, power, it's all tied to sexual dominance. The first century historian, his name is Dio Chrysostom, speaking on same-sex desire, and again, I just read this because there's no sense of like you're just born with like a homosexual desire. You're just born, like to Paul, as he talks about, in a second, but to Rome, there's just a sense that you're born a heterosexual, but same-sex stuff happened all the time. So this man says, the man whose appetite is insatiate in such things, and when he finds there's no scarcity, no resistance in this field, will have contempt for the easy conquest and scorn for a woman's love. He's trying to figure out why men would have sex with other men, right? They have scorn for a woman's love as a thing too readily given, in fact, too utterly feminine, and will turn his assault against the male quarters, eager to befoul the youth who will very soon be magistrates, judges, and generals, believing that in them he will find a kind of pleasure difficult and hard to procure. Right? And this is not a Christian guy, this is a Roman historian, trying to figure out, because again, to him, everybody is born heterosexual, and so there must be a reason why you'd go have sex with men, and this is one of them. Women are too easy. Women are too inferior. There's no real, I don't know, you're playing a game, and if you're trying to conquer, you're trying to show your virility, this is how you do it. So again, in both Roman and Jewish society, there's no actual concept of homosexuality. In fact, in no society, right? It's not till the 1800s that even the word hetero or homosexual even comes around as we kind of discover psychology. And so there's just reasonings, why would men do this? And they have all sorts of reasons for why they would do this. But again, sexual activity of all kinds for Romans, it's tied to being rich, it's tied to being powerful, it's tied to exploiting the vulnerable, the less power, for your own honor, your own pleasure, your own gain. And so Paul is writing, he's speaking to the Jews about the Gentiles who live in this society. This is the society they live in, right? And he's talking about the universality of sin. And he says the reason they do all of these things, this whole list, right? Not just the same-sex stuff, but everything. Disobeyed parents, boastful, proud, all this stuff. It's all a part of turning your back. Like they see in nature, Paul says nature shows us who God is. Nature tells us all we need to know. But they turn their backs willingly on God. And because they turn their backs, they fell into all of these things. They fell into this whole vice list. And what's interesting about that is that today, kind of as Christians, a lot of Christians go, well, it's not a sin to be born gay, it's just a sin to act upon that. But that's actually not what Paul says. Paul says actually the very feeling of it yourself is actually, that's the sin. It's when you turn from God that then those feelings come. Right? It wasn't there before. And so when we say that's just our own kind of Christian compromise, and be like, well, if you're born gay, that's not a sin because we know you're just born gay, right? But actually, Paul says, no. Any even feeling of that, it all comes from this turning away from God and turning away from nature. Right? It comes from turning away from nature, turning your backs on God, and kind of falling into depravity, right? And he keeps appealing to nature. He says, you should know. But the hard part with that, of course, is that in Paul's world, nature is very different than ours. In Paul's world, the natural world, men are superior to women. Women are inferior, right, in all these different ways. Masters are the natural law is that masters are over slaves, and that even Jews come before Gentiles. Right? In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul, again, he appeals to nature. And he argues from nature that men with short hair, that's natural. Nature tells us that short-haired men is good, long-haired men are a disgrace, long-haired women brings glory to God, because this is what nature tells us. Right? And we go, well, that's weird. What does nature have to tell us about the length of hair? But in this culture, that's natural. Women have long hair. Men have short hair. This brings glory to God. In Romans 11, he's talking about how God is bringing in these wild Gentiles and he's grafting them into the Jewish faith. He goes, this goes against nature. Right? Paul's understanding the Jews are above Gentiles. God's allowing them in, but it's not natural. Right? God's love for Israel is natural. Women having long hair, men short hair, this is natural. And so, and the same thing, heterosexual, that's natural. There's no thought of this. And so as he talks about nature, as he appeals to nature, it's hard because his own nature stems from his own context, right? Because again, men who are passive, women who are aggressive in any sort of sense, that's considered unnatural. Rape and prostitutes was considered natural because at least kids could come out of that, right? Whereas, like we said, contraceptive is considered unnatural. And so natural, right? Sex with your wife, sex with your slaves, and sex with female prostitutes, all of that is natural. It's all part of what nature tells us. And so it's hard for us to be like, okay, because nature also told them that this, the universe is built in 3 tiers. It also tells us that the sun goes around the earth. There's a lot of things in nature that they understand about nature that we just know isn't true. And so it's hard when Paul appeals to nature, says, doesn't nature show you? Well, not in our day, right? Paul's day, yes. This is their understanding, but it's based in their own context. And so it's hard for us to just say, oh yeah, nature clearly shows us this. Not exactly a scientific community built around them. And then in verse 27, right, this is kind of the one verse for sure, where it says, as they fell into depravity, as they turned from God, men were inflamed with desire. Not sure what your version says. And again, Paul hears this, and not just Paul, but all Roman writers, because again, there's a lot of Romans, non-Christians, who still think that any sort of same-sex thing with a man is wrong. It should be illegal, because they assume everybody is heterosexual. But they're Stoics, right? Like Paul and his friends, they're Stoics, and in Stoicism, to control your emotions is the key. You have to control your emotions. You have to use logic to control everything. And so the whole point is to control. And so when he says you were inflamed with your passion, right? The Stoics, it's all about moderation, control, logic, self-discipline. These are the greatest virtues. And so he says these Gentiles, when they turned from God to try and gain control of their lives, what actually happened is they lost control to their emotions, and their emotions took them, and they have this whole vice list of things that they do out of excess, this loss of control. And then that being out of control ends up controlling them, and they do all these things that are unnatural, right? And this excess, this rejection of God, you have out of control passions, evil, greed, depravity, envy, murder, heartlessness, ruthlessness. This is Paul's list. This is not Paul giving a sexual ethic. This is not Paul's section on let me talk about sex. He's talking about what the Gentiles do and how when they turn their backs on God, it leads to all of these things, which to him is not natural. But he goes, this isn't natural. And again, now along come some commentators and they say, well, there's no way Paul's talking about normal Gentiles. This is not normal everyday Gentile life. They go, right, like this is just not how it works. And so 3 of the different commentators, they say, no. He's actually pointing at the aristocrats, especially the 2 emperors themselves. 2 emperors at the time, right? And he's looking at the excesses of the Gentile courts, of the Gentile emperors, and they're speaking about that, and he's showing that because everybody's aware of this. And 2 of them, Caligula, who came right before Nero, and Nero at the time that Paul writes this. Caligula is a guy who, well-known, he would invite people to guests, and then he would take your wife, and he would rape her in the next room, and then he would come back and tell you about it. This is what he did. He'd give reports. And then he would take men and he would do all sorts of same-sex stuff with them at the parties. And then at one point, he actually took one of his generals and he sexually humiliated him at the party. And so that general got a bunch of other guys and they assassinated him. And they stabbed him in the genitals. And so a lot of people, they take Paul's line because nobody knows what to do with this, where Paul says, and they received in themselves due penalty. No one knows what to do with that, unless you're a preacher from the 80s, then it was AIDS. But according to theologians, right, he's talking about Caligula. He says, when you do these things, these excesses that you did, and it was weird, terrible stuff, he goes, and you received in yourself the due penalty. Lots of people go, well, clearly he's talking about him. But Nero, Nero, who's writing at the time of Paul, right, he raped lots of people's wives and their sons. Incest with his own mother. He ran a brothel. He took the passive role in open public displays of same-sex. And his own tutor, Seneca, said, oh man, this guy literally said he is another Caligula. Not going so good for him. And so for a lot of commentators, for a lot of people, when they read what Paul's talking about, this is not a thing about sexual ethics. This is just about the Gentiles and just how wild they've gone in the excess, right? Same-sex and heterosexual excess, both of them stem from this turning away from God, right? And then people say, well, what would Paul do if he understood that people are just like, for him to even have a homosexual desire means you've already turned away from God, but like this was 2,000 years ago. We know people you're literally just born that way, right? And so what would you do with someone who says, actually, no, I follow God, but I still have the same-sex desire? What would Paul do with that? And that's the number one question for so many people. If he thinks from nature, he goes, well, actually what nature tells us is you're born this way, and there's many people born that way who love God, and what would we do with this? And what would we do with this? And so this is where it's hard, right? This is why people call this a disputable matter, because you read it and you go, well, it says it in English. It seems pretty clear. You go into the context, and again, some people agree, some people disagree. They write essays back and forth with each other, and it's interesting dialogue. But the one thing that comes out of it is it's not super clear-cut. If it's clear-cut for you, that's excellent. But there's a lot of people who debate. There's a lot of people who read it in different ways. And as you read through it, it's pretty easy to see why. Right? It's pretty easy to see this. Even our own modern marriage, right? Our own modern marriage today, again, is not really a biblical marriage. A biblical marriage is a 30-year-old marrying a teenager. He has all the power, she has none. That is not modern marriage. What is modern marriage? Modern marriage is 2 people mutually submitting, people of equal worth, equal value, mutually submitting to each other. This is a modern marriage. The Bible has no concept of that, right? When someone says, I have a biblical marriage, that means you're married a child, right? But as Christians, we pass laws against child marriage, and we all think that's good. Everybody, right? We're all good with this? Yes, good. Just keeping on track here, right? Right? Because the power dynamics, right? Power dynamics plays into everything, into marriage, into sexuality, and it doesn't transplant to our culture. And so, all of these things, like even when in the Bible it talks about like Jesus as the groom and us as the bride, right? And we worship and obey him. And you're like, I don't worship and obey my wife or my husband, right? Like that's a weird thought. But it's because our marriage is not like in that day when you talk about the groom has all the power, and he's a full-grown man, and you're a kid, and you don't know anything, and you're just you're a kid. Because the other structures in which we see Christ in the church is as a master who bought us as a slave and as a king. And again, not like our British kings, but like a real king who has all the power. This picture is always of one who has power who brings in someone who has no power. That's the structure. And we don't have ways to think about that. That's not how marriage works today. It's not one with all the power, and then you submit to the one with all the power. I'm sure there's probably some people who think that's a great way, but that's not us. It's not us. And so for many people, as the context of marriage changes from the New Testament, from the Old to the New, from the New to the last 2,000 years, and again, looking to the future, for some people, they go, yeah, I have absolutely no problem with same-sex marriage. I don't think any of these verses are actually talking about homosexuality. I don't think it speaks to it. They have no problem. This is, Paul's talking about this kind of, free-for-all sexual indulgence and excess. And so for just two people who both love God and happen to love each other and be in a covenant, faithful marriage, there's a lot of Christians who have no problem with that. And there's a lot of Christians who say, no, Paul says what he says, the Bible says what it says. Anything outside of a man and a woman, it's just not going to happen, right? Not going to happen. And this is where we sit, right? This is where we sit as society. We have millions of Christians who believe this. We have millions of Christians who believe this. They've all done their study. They all go through this. And at the end of the day, they make up their minds. And again, for those who say, no, why would two loving people not be able to get married? Because what is the picture of marriage? Two people equally submitting to each other for the sake of what? Of the symbol of kind of faithful covenant marriage, right, between us and God. God's faithfulness and our faithfulness back. But also marriage is supposed to be a place not where one of you is in power and one isn't, but it's where the two of you die to self day after day after day. And as you grow in what Jesus calls us to lay down your life for the other person. A lot of people say, well, that's what marriage is supposed to be. It's not about kids, right? It's not about kids anymore. And so, could same-sex couples have marriage? A lot of people say, yeah, it fits. You can have a same-sex marriage. You can die to self. You can love the other, and you can build that way. Other people say, no, not going to happen. Anything outside of what we call traditional marriage. And this is where we are. And I say we as culture, we as society, but we as a church too. I'm not going to make you put your hands up. But we have people who are on all sides. We have people who are like, nope, traditional marriage only. Other people say, absolutely. Two people in faithful, committed covenant, right? That's still honoring to God, and they have no problem with it. One thing that we can say is that it's not, for the most part, I'm going to say this, it's not clear-cut, right? There are reasons you go and you go, actually, it's a little grayer than I would like. It was a lot more black and white when my pastor told me what to think. But as you read it, it gets a little tougher, right? It gets a little tougher. And again, for people who just say, well, slavery, abortion, divorce, views on war, we've all changed. I get that. I get that. Like people who say, well, we changed on women, we changed on slavery, we can change on this. I have no problem with that. Other people say, no, we changed on slavery, we haven't changed on women, we're not going to change on this. That's how you read it. That's how you read it. Right? This is what makes Christianity diverse. This is what makes church diverse. This is what makes everything fun. Right? And so the question for us as a church is not what do you believe about the queer, especially the queer Christian community. What do you believe about marriage? You need to do your own work. You need to do your own reading. You need to do your own research, and you need to understand why you believe what you believe. Part of what we're talking about at Centered Set Church is that you're going to believe what you believe. Whether you've done the work, whether you haven't done the work, you're still going to believe what you believe. And so for, people who say, science has changed, everything's changed, culture's changed, if that's what you believe, then that's what you believe. Other people say it hasn't changed, then that's what you believe. And we're not the first people to disagree on this, right? Paul comes along and he says, no more circumcision, right? People literally freak out. Why? What is circumcision? It's called an everlasting covenant between God and Israel. And he just does away with it. And people freak out, right? People do. They freak out. So Paul has a bit in chapter 14 of Romans, the same book. And he's talking to people. Again, he has Jews and he has Gentiles, and they are not getting along because they both view God differently. They view their faith differently. So here's what he says. He says, accept other believers who are weak in faith, and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, another believes with sensitive conscience will only eat vegetables. Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't. Those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. Who are you to condemn someone else's servants? They are responsible to the Lord. So let him judge whether they are right or wrong, and with the Lord's help they will do what is right and will receive his approval. In the same way, some think one day is more holier than another, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced that whichever day you choose is acceptable. Those who worship the Lord on a special day do it to honor him. Those who eat any kind of food do it to honor the Lord, since they give thanks to God before eating. Those who refuse to eat certain foods also want to please the Lord and give thanks to God. For we don't live for ourselves, we don't die for ourselves. If we live, it's to honor the Lord. If we die, it's to honor the Lord. So whether we live or we die, we belong to the Lord. Right? Christ died and rose again for this very purpose, to be the Lord both of the living and the dead. So why do you condemn another believer? Why do you look down on another believer? Remember, right, we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. For the scripture says, as surely as I live, every knee will bend to me, and every tongue will confess and give praise to God. So yes, each of us will give a personal account to God. So let's stop condemning each other and decide to live in such a way, right, that you will not cause another believer to stumble and fall. This is where Paul, on some of his things, right, this is where he ends up. He says, you have to decide in your heart, in your mind. And what he says is, do not judge each other over disputable matters. Now, maybe for you, this is not a disputable matter. For millions and millions of Christians, and for Christians sitting in this room, it is a disputable matter. Right? It is. And some people say it's not disputable, it's clear as day, and they both find out they're on opposite ends of the same thing, but different ends. And it's clear for both of them, and a bunch of people find themselves in the middle. And our hope as a church, what we're going to talk about is this idea of centered set, which is centered set says we're going to put Jesus at the center, his birth, his teachings, his death, his resurrection, and his return. What that means, that's at the center. Everything else is a disputable matter. Everything else is peripheral. Everything else is tertiary. Everything else spins around that, right? The core of your wheel has to be solid, but everything else outside can be soft, as we've learned. Right? And so this is part of our question is, can we as Christians, not doing this for the first time, but doing what thousands of Christians have done through the last 2,000 years, is can we sit next to each other if can we worship next to each other if we don't agree, right? Can we disciple people who have a different theology and even a different practice than we have? And can we be discipled by people we disagree? It's not just can I disciple them, can I be discipled by them, right? Can we invite people to discover Jesus? And can we rejoice when people find Jesus who we wouldn't normally think would find Jesus? Right? Can we walk with them as the Holy Spirit leads them, or can we also allow the Holy Spirit to lead us through these other Christians, right? And this is what a centered set model is trying to do. I think Michelle is here, hopefully, because Michelle's going to come up and just read something just to lay this out. But this is the hope. And again, on this specific topic, again, wherever you stand, good for you. Great. As long as you know why, right? As long as you've done the work and you know why, like Paul says, good for you. You know why you do it. You know why you believe what you believe. But can you still worship with these other people? Can you pray for them? Can you love them? Because ultimately, over all these things, Jesus is asked, even when Paul is asked, everything that's important, he goes, can you love your neighbor? Because if you can't love your neighbor, nothing else actually matters, right? Nothing else matters if you can't love your neighbor. And so as a centered set churches, the hope is to move down this road and say, okay, this will look messy. It's not super clean cut. But are we okay with that? Are we good with that? Are we willing to walk down that road so that people who we would normally say, actually, you're welcome to sit, you're welcome to tithe always, right? But you're not actually you're not worthy to kind of really be a part and to join in this community. Are we willing to say, you know what, I am willing and able to put aside our disagreements, and I'm able to worship with you, and I'm able to love you, and I'm able to walk with you, I'm able to pray and rejoice in all the good things. I'm able to hold you up when you're struggling. Can I do those things? Right? Can I do those things? That is what a centered set church is trying to do. And again, it's not clean cut. It's kind of messy. People are coming to Jesus from all over the place. But as a pastor and as a leadership team, this is what we're hoping to do. This is the point where we're hoping to move to Because again, we think as we look forward to the church and the church of the future, I think it has to be a place where we can put aside what sets us apart, and we can focus on the only thing that actually makes us Christian, which is the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so that is our hope. That is what and next week we're going to talk about that in a super practical way. What does that look like?